this is on the Daily Wire. It says the Media Trade Association that vilified Ben Shapiro last month for simply appearing at a recent trade show apologized on Thursday, saying its treatment of the Daily Wire star wasn't right. Podcast Movement, the industry's biggest trade group and host of annual conferences that bring together top media companies, said in a statement that it was wrong to claim that Shapiro's presence at its recent Dallas show caused harm. The mea culpa came after the Daily Wire and media giant Cumulus both vowed to end their support for the organization. So the statement said, as we stated, we're continuing to evaluate our policies, guiding social media and events with inclusivity, diversity, and respect for all. We have to start by sincerely apologizing to Mr. Shapiro for our reaction when he visited a booth that we sold his company. That wasn't right. Podcast Movement began in 2014 with 4 podcasters who had an idea to create a vibrant community that was for podcasters by podcasters. We're still those people with the same idea and recognize there's work to do as we grow. Daily Wire co-founder Jeremy Boring, who at the company's recent backstage event had blasted Podcast Movement for unadulterated bigotry, said, people rarely admit when they do wrong, particularly on the left, where every cultural indicator reinforces your error. Podcast Movement did the right thing with this apology. Co-founder Dan Franks also called me to make clear their treatment of Ben was unacceptable. Good on them. Jeremy's being very gracious here. I am a slightly less gracious person in general. So, yeah, it's an apology. It's the right thing to do. So, kind of like Carnegie Mellon responding to their professor and the horrible thing she said. Yeah, it's the right thing to respond to it. But, to me, it's not quite enough. And especially with Podcast Movement, yeah, they gave the apology. This is like 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later. And they're only doing it because they had no other choice. I mean, they tried everything they could to avoid apologizing. But then once Cumulus got on board, and there were more companies, having our back on this thing, as they should, then Podcast Movement was like, well, what choice do they have? If you want to have a podcast conference, a podcast organization, and you lose Daily Wire and you lose Cumulus, you start losing all of the biggest podcasting companies, well, then then your company is gone. So they have no choice, and they very begrudgingly finally apologized as an act of sheer self-preservation. Fine. I'm glad they did. But I am certainly not at all convinced that this was something that they did because they really feel that they were wrong and they're trying to make amends or whatever. Well, before you go, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. And while you're at it, if you want to go watch or listen to my full show, head to dailywire.com and subscribe. You can also catch my show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. So go check it out now. I demand it. Your compliance is somewhat appreciated.